Welcome, fellow synthesizer sickos. I'm Vulture Culture, and tonight we're going to be answering the question, is the Roland JX-3P from 1983 a legendary synthesizer? We've been putting the most iconic synthesizers to the test to see if they really deserve that legendary synth status. So tonight's live stream, we're going to start off by making some sounds and checking out what the JX-3P can do. And then we're going to cover some of the history, some of the fun facts, look at the price of this synthesizer, both when it released, adjusted for inflation, and today, what you can expect to pay for it on the street, check out the devaluation, and then finally, after all of that, we will run the synth through the legendary test. So that's where you guys help me decide in the chat via a poll whether or not this synth is all it's cracked up to be. So this first patch I actually have sampled. It's in the Legendary Synthesizer Sample Pack. The link's in the description. Currently $10. Price is jumping up to $30 soon. And this patch I called IR3109 because it is the name of the filter chip that's in the JX-3P, which happens to be the same filter chip in the Jupiter 8. Now, if you love the Juno 106, the more famous of the Roland analog synths from this era, it actually doesn't have an IR3109 chip. It has a different chip, very similar to the IR3109. But if you want that Jupiter 8 sound, it's actually in here. Juno 6 and 60 have an IR3109 chip, and then the later JX synths, the JX-8P and JX-10 in their respective rack mounts, those have the IR3R05 filter chip, which is brighter, I would say. Sounds really great. It's in the Alpha Juno as well, one of my favorite synths, probably the best value analog synth you can get from the 80s. But it's a different kind of sound and doesn't have that classic Jupiter 8 sort of feel. So very excited to be checking us out tonight. So yeah, you can really hear the resonance here. Just that incredibly gorgeous resonance. We can push it even further if we wanted, but you'll hear it doesn't really go into full self oscillation. Frozen Potato says, yeah, it sounds very different than the JX-8 and 10. Sounds good even with the resonance maxed out, but it's not quite as aggressive as the 8P. You can actually go inside the synth and with some trim ponts crank it up. I saw that someone was saying there's a $600 JX-10 Snapshot Music. That's a very good price. So I intend at some point to do a comparison stream between this because I recently got a JX-10 as well. Mighty Pinto, welcome. Yeah, they're completely off guard. We'll be back to Wednesdays, I believe, next week. It's just a gorgeous sounding synth. I'm going to go, I have a retroactive PG 2K here, which is a great programmer. But they actually cost more than the synth at this point nowadays. So I'm going to go to assign. I'm going to go to main, shift assign, and I'm going to load a tone. Yep, that's correct. And I want to pull up this other patch, Metal Pad. I put it in the sample pack. I think I forgot something metallic, metal fetishist, I think, pad. And this is a really cool one because it uses a cross mod. So we're actually only hearing one oscillator right now. So, I mean, just can really sound pretty incredible overall, in my opinion. There's also just a lot of really great presets right here on the front panel. One of them that I sampled in the Legendary Sample Pack is String 1. To me, it's the closest to the JX-3P's famous soundtrack patch. This synthesizer does not have velocity or aftertouch, so you're not going to quite get that sound, but it's you know, it's in the ballpark, so... Huh, this is weird. Oh, I'm in the wrong, I was in the wrong section here. So let's try that again. It's a little loud, I think. Yeah, very beautiful sound there. We got a couple of other good ones. What do I like? Synth Brass 2. I sampled this one. Yeah, really cool sorts of sounds there. What else do I like that you find all the time on this synth? Let's go to Filter Flow. This is another really beautiful pad type of sound. Asks, I saw a tech writer for a band that had an input for JX-3P. Would you be concerned about failure on tour if you toured with one? I wouldn't ever take a vintage synth on tour without having a backup. These are so reasonably priced, sub $1,000, that you actually could reasonably expect for them to be, you know, if you had one fail on you, you could just swap another one in. It's probably at that point cheaper than buying a modern synth, right? But it depends. Snapshot says, from Espen Crafts videos, the sequencer is pretty goated, huh? I don't really use sequencers a lot, but yes. Here's another one. I'm going to load this patch here. And I might need to modify it a bit, but... sometimes they load weird. And I can also just turn down the reverb a bit here. Got a little delay going. So we could check out the sound of this. We could make ourselves a little sequence, right? So if I just go to right, you'll notice that it's sort of queued up this 16-step sequencer here. So we could do something like... something like that, and then just... It's about to get crazy. I hope you're listening in stereo. We can move it to like a square wave. I believe it's this button here to input silence. We can thin it out using the high pass filter. So it's a really quick example. We've taken the sound sort of away from the initial sound that I started with, but that patch is also in the Legendary Synth sample pack, link in the description. So yeah, this synth is super beautiful sounding. I actually am beginning to think it might be the all-time best value vintage analog synth, depending on what you care about. And there are different types of people, different strokes for different folks. One thing that might stop this from being your favorite would be MIDI implementation is weird. We'll get to that in a bit. We'll play some more sounds too, by the way. I'm not done playing some sounds, but just want to talk about some of the history here too. Biggest thing for me is velocity and aftertouch is non-present. So for some people, that's just a deal breaker. I would always like to point out the fact that, you know, Obrime, OBX, OBXA, OB8, none of them had velocity. Prophet 5, no velocity. Roland, Jupiter 4, 8, and 6, no velocity. So many of the legendary synths from that golden age of analog synthesis did not have velocity or aftertouch. So with that in mind, if you're going for those sorts of tones, you're not going to Junos. None of the Junos had aftertouch until you got to the Alpha Juno 1 or 2. So Saw Square Sky, Sign, welcome. Hidden Material, Diego, welcome. Tripwell, welcome. How's it going? So this synth was produced from 1983 to 1986, and the 3P actually stands for Programmable Preset Polyphonic Synthesizer. I don't know how well you guys can read that. But that's a super cool thing about this synth. Let me turn my volume up a little bit here. So this was one of the first synths to have a MIDI interface in it. So when Dave Smith and the president of Roland, I can't pronounce his name, I need to learn how to pronounce it for these streams, but when they debuted MIDI, it was a joint partnership for this free protocol that everybody could use. And they did it by hooking up a Prophet 600 to a Jupiter 6. And this, I guess you could say, is probably the second synth that had MIDI, and then the Juno 106, I think, following this. And as such, the MIDI implementation is not great, where you can basically program the synth or you can use MIDI, not both at the same time, which is a little frustrating for a modern synthesist. So something to know about the synth if you're looking at buying it. So the synthesizer did not come with a programmer. You can get a PG200, which is the programmer for this, for not that much on Reverb. And you can buy one of these bad boys for about $750. And if you know Roland, you know the Juno 106, right? So it's a analog synth with DCOs, or digitally controlled oscillators. I always say digitally controlled analog oscillators because people hear that word digital and their minds fry. All of a sudden, they start thinking this is a digital synth, but it is not. Only the tuning of the oscillators is controlled digitally, and it was to make the synths better for touring, because if you take a voltage-controlled oscillator analog synth on the road with you, the moment you turn it on, it warms up, the tuning is off, you have to tune it again. They're not as reliable. In a studio setting, we nowadays love the sound of voltage-controlled oscillators. They have a little bit more wilderness to them, a little sauvage tone, a little more life, as some of the members of the channel would say. But as far as a reliable analog synth, this is a much better thing. Swords and Synthesizers says, Roland has some clock sync issues with Korg and Yamaha, right? Edge triggering differences, I think. Yeah, I think the sequencer trigger in on the synth would be pretty good to go, but I don't know about that. I'd love to check out an Iridium at some point. NCOs are technically a different thing, I believe. The Novation Summit, and I want to say the first synth was actually the Modulus 002, which I have off screen. So to use NCOs. But that's an interesting thing. I don't know if that's an interesting difference to ever get talked about. But this synth has the same oscillators, more or less, as the Juno series, but it has 2 oscillators per voice instead of 1, which is really the reason you want to get a JX over a Juno, in my opinion. I much prefer the sound of 2 oscillator synths to 1. The Juno series and the Jupiter 4 basically follow the architecture of a single oscillator per voice with a sub-oscillator, which is different. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of illustrate something about that real quick. So if I go to Shift Init, we should have ourselves a little init patch here. And I'm going to set both of the waves. We have a few different wave shapes. So we can go to a sawtooth wave. We can go to a pulse wave, a square wave, or noise on this synth, right? And so we don't have variable pulse width modulation. So that's one of the downsides of the JX series. None of them do. You can do sort of like a hard sync trick to get pulse width modulation, but you'll only have 1 oscillator if you do that. Madeira has a cool video on that, actually. But for this example, we're just going to use a square wave and a sawtooth wave mixed about 50-50. And we're going to just drop 1 down an octave. So that kind of gives us our typical sort of Roland Juno sound. But it's not going to quite sound like a Juno. But we can get some pretty great bass sounds out of this. Kick on the chorus. And I've sampled this patch as well. So we could get some really close to Juno sounds, but it's not going to be exactly the same because a sub-oscillator is slave to the main oscillator. I don't mean to get too nerdy too quickly here. But essentially they'll be in perfect phase. Whereas on this synth, there's still a little bit of difference in between there. So just something to know about this synth. We have an LFO, which we could route all over the place, not to the VCA though. There are of course mods that let you do things like that. And we have just like that great chorus. So if I slow this down a little and increase the release, route it to the VCA, we could get into sorts of, E-piano type sounds. If I bring this up an octave. We can be in that Juno territory, kick on the chorus, and it gets pretty beautiful. And we could turn the delays back on, right? just beautiful sorts of sounds. And so we've got analog oscillators that are digitally controlled, just like the Juno 106, often considered an very famous synth. We've got the filter from the Jupiter 8, so the more famous filter than the Juno 106 has. We have a high-pass filter. My thing about high-pass filters and it's continuously variable, unlike on the Juno series or the Juno 106, and I want to say Alpha Junos. I have a just like stepped filter, high-pass filter. What are some of the other things we could do? Of course, we could detune this sound, right? If we bring this to 2 sawtooth waves, right, we could get a very big... Write a pattern. Here we could go. And play around with this sound a bit, right? Now, one thing we have is we can actually use this cross mod mode here. To get these totally unique sounds. And again, you don't have that on a Juno, right? All the way into some really weird stuff that's possible. We have hard sync too, which of course you can't do on a Juno 106 because it doesn't have 2 oscillators, right? What are some other things? We can control the pitch of the oscillators with the envelope. You can't do that on a Juno 106, I don't believe. But we don't have a couple of things. We don't have portamento or second chorus mode. This is my favorite chorus on any synth I've heard, I want to say, that I've owned. Yeah, it's just really good. It's a really great analog chorus. I don't think the Alpha Juno's chorus is as good. So some bads here. The chorus chips, like on all Roland synths, will eventually go bad. On this one, it's really, really clean. There is a slight amount of noise, but it's not really perceptible, is it? We don't have an arpeggiator, but we do have a sequencer. For some people, the arpeggiator is more valuable than a sequencer. 83, synthesizer manufacturers were starting to go, can I get a scum cheers in the fucking chat, by the way? Cheers to you guys. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this live stream. We do a stream on this channel every Wednesday night, checking out something to do with synthesizers. And I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who makes this channel the place to be if you're a synthesizer sicko like myself. So, cheers, guys. So some people like arpeggiators better than sequencers, and we don't have, one of the biggest omissions too is no solo mode or unison. So unlike some other synthesizers from this era, would have been really nice to have had a unison mode on this synth. It's a really cool synth though, and I think more people should check it out. Here's another preset Fat Fifth kind of soundtrack, a la the D50 sort of a sound. And let's add some release to that. Make sure that's sent there. Yeah. slider doesn't do as much as I would like. I notice it pulling out the high end more than giving. When this synthesizer came out in 1983, it was sold for $1,395, which in today's money is $4,419, which is quite a lot of money. It gives you an example of how expensive synthesizers really were in the 80s. So nowadays, you could get a Polybrute 12 or a Moog Muse for substantially less than the price of a JX-3P at the time. And this was not considered as high end of a synth as, say, a Jupiter 6 or especially a Jupiter 8. Or even the Juno 106, I want to say, launched at a higher price than this. So at the time, this was considered, not as much, and that's not including the price of the PG2K. But nowadays, the street price of the synthesizer, and I determine the street price by averaging the 3 cheapest synths in good condition, every key, knob, and function working. I don't mind a few battle scars or patina, but every single function of the synth needs to work for me to consider the price. And I average either the 3 cheapest or the lowest third of the used market on Reverb with the shipping included. So with shipping included, you can expect to pay about $750 for a JX-3P nowadays. It's just at the beginning of 2025. Of course, if you're watching this video in the future, it's going to be a different price, but that's about where they are right now. They've actually come down from about a year ago. They were about $800 or so. So it's a great time to get them. And I think they're very dependable. They don't have the same chip issues that the Juno 106 has. Super cool. The market at the time was interesting because 82 sort of is the beginning of since like the Korg Poly 61 came out the year before this, and that was maybe the first synthesizer to have dropped all the hands-on control in favor of a single edit slider. And it's actually not that bad. If I move this programmer here, you can see right there, we actually have all of the parameters printed right there on the synth. It's a very simple synthesizer, so it's pretty easy to follow what's going on. And you can program it relatively easily because it's only got one envelope and things like that, one LFO, one envelope, directly from the front panel. But it is nice to have the programmer, and I was seeing on Reverb today there was a JX-3P with the PG200 for about $1,000. So, is it heavy? No, I wouldn't say it's heavy. Yeah, it's pretty good. Jerome, welcome to the stream. How's it going? I'd say it's not the heaviest analog synth for sure. So, the devaluation of the price of the synth from $4,419 to $750 with shipping is a deflation of 83%, which is pretty crazy. It might be one of the highest deflated synths, meaning, which is great. That's what you're looking for. Most people, most of the time, should buy a vintage synth that is in this market range where it's like really cool, lots of features, really great vintage analog tone, but its price has come down a lot versus the synths, of course, that have held their value, like a Yamaha CS80 or something like that. A lot of people will say that the DX7 is what caused this one slider for parameter, parameter programming style of synth, but really this came out and was certainly developed before the DX7 was out. I think it's just a case that the market was already going in that way, but the DX7 was certainly the death knell. And I also think that's part of why this synth isn't more famous, because the DX7 sort of killed or did kill analog synth. So most of the famous analog synths came out before the DX7. This came out the same year as the DX7, which, of course, for those of you who don't know, the first real commercially viable digital synthesizer and started the FM revolution. Wasn't the first FM synth, but certainly the one that was affordable. Roland does make a plug-in version of this. I think it's about $200, which feels steep. And Madeira, fellow YouTuber, really great YouTube channel. He's got a review for the plug-in version or the boutique version. I think he's got the plug-out version for his System 8, and he said it does not sound that close to the JX-3P, so keep that in mind. Blade Runner says he can vouch for it, though. So welcome to the stream, by the way, my friend. So, you know, I'm not so sure. AF Major Production, why does it look like you're floating through space? It's because you're high on drugs. So let's talk about some songs that use this synth. Well, first off, here's another patch sync sweep that I programmed in, or I sampled for the Legendary Synthesizer sample pack. And it really highlights the sweeping sync that you can do. So Harold Faltermeyer, the composer for the Axel F, I think the song's called. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. He actually had a JX-3P and used it on the Fletch theme. So if you listen to that, you can hear this preset, maybe modified a bit, used on that theme. So that's a really cool use of it. Robert Smith from The Cure had one of these. Labyrinth, a modern rapper, used this on one of his songs. I forgot what it's called off the top of my head. Arcade Fire, a modern indie dance band, used it on the track Porno. And then I think probably the most famous use of it is Papua New Guinea by the Future Sound of London. And it's sort of like the top notes of that song. So it has been used on famous tracks, but maybe not as many famous tracks as the Jupiter 8 or the Juno 106. Terry Gray, welcome to the stream. Oh, if you love Arcade Fire, well, here you go. Here's the synth they use. Go ahead and listen to the track Porno, and you'll get that JX-3P vibe. So the reputation of the synth, I would say this synth has a good enough reputation among the synth crowd. But I do still feel like it's pretty underrated, and the price reflects that. If you're looking for a great synth that sounds awesome, that sounds really vintage, and is very affordable, this has got to be towards the top of the list. We will see after we run it through the Legendary Synthesizer Test to see if it's truly legendary. I'm guessing it's going to end up in the classic or iconic category. That would be my guess, but we will see. I never know beforehand. I think it's a hidden gem. To summarize my thoughts on it, I think it sounds so good. Pulsar, Tom mentioned this patch earlier. Using that sample and hold. Yeah, the Fletch theme is awesome. Rob, the action is actually really great on this synth. It feels wonderful. Unlike, I'm pretty used to clacky vintage synth keys, but this one's a very good one. Of course, it is not a D50 or Alpha Juno in the sense that it doesn't have that like super premium velocity aftertouch sort of feel, but it feels great. Yeah, just really good. So I think this is a great time. We've got a couple more. Oh, let me play Planet too. This is a very famous sound. Let me turn up the reverb a bit for this one. We love a big reverb for a patch like this. You're giving those Ice Planet 9000 vibes. So that's using the negative envelope. So that's another thing we could do on this synth. We can go positive or negative. So right now, you can hear that the release is actually raising the filter. If I flip that around, Yeah, wonderful filter resonance from the R3109 chip. When you hear a synth like this, it makes you appreciate a great analog filter. Not all analog filters sound great. Certainly digital filters don't have the complete, what is the phrase I'm looking for? Like, they're not the only ones that can sound bad, but when you hear this, it's like one of those synths where the more you push the resonance, the better it sounds. And you do lose some bass. So if I, bring that down. The volume there. So anyways, now it's time for the main event, the Legendary Synthesizer Test. This is a painstakingly devised test of 11 questions created with the help of you guys to see if a synthesizer has what it takes to be called legendary. Here's how it works. For a synthesizer to earn the title of legendary, it needs to score 11 points or more. 9 or 10, and it's still iconic. 7 to 8 points, that's a classic synthesizer. 6, respectable. 4 or 5, the synth is just anything less, and we're diving into dubious or even impoverished territory where synths gather dust in the back of the studio. So how do we score? I'll read each question aloud and then post a poll in the chat. Yes means the JX-3P passes the test, and no means that it is out of tune with our expectations. You'll have 1 minute to vote on each question. You, the chat, get half a point for each question, and I contribute the other half. So if you love or hate the synth, let your voice be heard. The last question, the Vangelis test, of course, counts for 2 full points. Let's see if the JX-3P can filter through the competition. Are you ready? Let's start the test. First off, too, I want to just jump over here and get some music going, I think. And we'll just turn this up. There we go. I like to have a little bit of music. And so, yes. And oh, I think I need to jump over here real quick, too. Oh, this is bizarre. Let's get rid of that. Oh, that's bizarre, too. Let's just pull that on over here and kind of pull it out here. Yeah, something like that. Okay. And I need to clear this of everything we got before. So let's just go ahead and make sure we got these all right. I think this is from the last stream. Should have cleared it beforehand, but it's been a while, so just give me a split second here. Zeros. There we go. 0, 0, 0. And the total score, 0. There we go. That's kind of close there. I think I've fucked up a couple of these, but we'll go ahead and start with that. And I'm also going to just go into the filters here and turn these off for now. I think that's okay for tonight's stream, something like this. So, Ed from Earth, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Cheers. So, we're going to start with the John Hammond test. Here, let me jump on over here. And I'm going to start a poll in the chat. There we are. And the John Hammond test from the movie Jurassic Park. Did this synthesizer bring innovation to the industry or move synthesizer technology forward? You guys have 1 minute on the clock. I'll start that right. Almost. Buffering right now. So you guys have 1 minute on the clock. The John Hammond test. Did the synthesizer bring innovation to the industry or move synthesizer technology forward? And this one's interesting because I'm very curious, because I could kind of see it either way. This was definitely one of the first synths of its kind, but a lot about it was done by the Korg Poly 61 the year before, 1982. MIDI, right? So this would be the first DCO synth with MIDI because the 61M hadn't come out yet. I believe that's correct. Is that enough to say? Everybody's saying MIDI. but the Jupiter 6 was the first. I don't know if this technically counts, but I think it's going to be the case that you guys go with it. Yes. And so you guys said yes. So I'm going to end that poll. And I think I can go ahead and say yes. I think you guys have convinced me that, in fact, MIDI is probably enough to give it the pass there. So that's 1 point. And we're going to start the next poll here. And this is the training day test. Thank you, 40 Thieves, for the name, by the way. Can a beginner easily tweak sounds directly from the front panel of the synth? And this one's interesting because they can sort of tweak them with this brilliant slider. But I'm not so sure about if that's enough that it can count for it. Because you can program everything from the front, but I don't know if it's enough. I really don't know if that counts. I'm also going to update the total score here. And we've got 30 seconds left, so let your voice be heard. I really don't know if I've fully determined for myself what I consider to be, the right amount of, like, how I am going to define this one going forward. I think that it's tough. It's on the line. Most people are saying no. That was 75% of you guys said no. And I think I am going to say no as well. If this brilliant slider did a little bit more, or we had like a time slider or something, without the PG200, I think this is sort of like the definition of a synth. It doesn't have hands-on control. I think going forward, it's got to have enough hands-on control, a la a lot of these synths. Matrix 6, DSS-1 wouldn't. Most of the rest of them would, and the JX-3P without the PG200 doesn't. Now, what's interesting is that I've thought about this as far as the cost of programmers go. Like I said, for $250 more than the synth, you could get a PG200 and program everything. PG2K, much more expensive, has random patch generators and things like that. Lots of cool stuff that the PG200 can't do. But as far as scoring on the Legendary Synthesizer Test, I've sort of decided to never count programmers because they tend to inflate the cost of the synth much more than passing this one test. Law of Awe, welcome to the stream. So moving along here, we're going on to the Daniel Day-Lewis test, one of my favorite tests on the chat, or on the stream. So the Daniel Day-Lewis test, one of my favorite actors. Can this synthesizer deliver an expressive performance with features like velocity, aftertouch, arpeggiators, sequencers, or MPE? So I've said it in the past, just velocity and aftertouch or something, and a pitch and mod wheel is not enough for me to pass this synthesizer. But you guys have a minute on the clock. You tell me what you think. I think if it had a little bit more hands-on control, and especially because, I'm gonna defer a little bit to Dub Station Zero here, my sequencer man, to talk about this, because I guess if you have the sequencer trigger in, but it's just this brilliance control for me really kills it. It's just not enough to really get all the way over on that, in my opinion. But you guys will let me know what you think. We've got 30 seconds left on the clock. Blade Runner says, Gary Newman chained 3 of these together for the Fury. I didn't know that. What's the Fury? I feel like a terrible Gary Newman fan that I don't know what that is. The LFO is a button. Yeah, there is. So you can actually press the LFO here, which is interesting, because unlike future Rolands that have the pitch bender that you can push forward, this one only goes up and down, but you do have a range, which is kind of nice. Okay, so that's a minute. 72% of you said no, and I think for the first time I've completely been in agreement with the chat so far. Let's see if we can make it all the way through the test. Usually I have pretty differing opinions from the chat on about 50% of the questions, which I think is interesting. The Roy Batty test. Was the synthesizer built to last with no major reliability issues or common problems? So minute on the clock starting right now. So Mark Anderson says, must consider early technology. This question, the Daniel Day-Lewis test, the previous question, I should say, I deliberately wrote to not consider that. Because the truth is, since like the Mini Moog, Prophet 5, Jupiter 8, they just are not as expressive as even synthesizers that came out a few years later, and certainly not as expressive as modern synths. And I love vintage synths. I've spent tens of thousands of dollars on them, but that doesn't mean that I think they're as expressive as modern synths, and I'm not going to pretend like they are. So I deliberately wrote that one test in particular to sort of be vintage phobic. We got 10 seconds left. Because there are vintage synths or even legendary synths like the CS80 that are very expressive. But a lot of the most famous synths of all time really just weren't. Everybody agrees that the Roy Batty test does the synthesizer. Is it built to last? Absolutely. It's a very built to last synth. So that takes us up to 2 points. Moving along to the aliens from Signs Test. Let's get this in the chat here. Does this synthesizer avoid any major design flaws or missing key features? Distilled, that's an interesting question. For me, the Juno 60, I just like synths that have 2 oscillators per voice. Juno 60, it doesn't, unfortunately. But that's up to you guys. We got 1 minute on the clock. Sorry, I'm starting it right now. What do you guys think? No. Does this synthesizer avoid any major design flaws? So if you're voting yes, that means it avoids design flaws. If you vote no, that means it has an Achilles heel. So I'd be curious to know what you guys think the Achilles heel is on the synthesizer. MIDI implementation is huge. It is difficult to run MIDI into the synth and tweak things at once. Even when I was sampling it, I would program a sound and then move it over to MIDI and then try to sample it. And if something was off, I'd have to move this little switch back here, back over. It's not the end of the world, but if you're not using the internal sequencer or sequencer, I think we got trigger in here, but just for the sequencer. So if you're not using the sequencer, you're kind of out of luck. 10 seconds left. I definitely should check it out, Blade Runner. Unison mode would be another thing. No solo or unison mode. So 72% of you said no, and I agree. The lack of the MIDI issues are probably enough of a problem to stop it from passing, but certainly when you consider that it also has no unison mode or no mode for solo, enough is missing from it that it doesn't cleanly pass. Next on to the Elvira test. Does the synthesizer rank among the most beautiful or iconic in terms of aesthetics? Everyone knows the most important part of a synthesizer sounds is how it looks. Everyone knows the most important part of how a synthesizer sounds is how it looks. One of my favorite tests. So this is interesting because right now we're at exactly 50% say yes and 50% say no. Is this one of the most beautiful synths of all time? Is it iconic in its look? That is the question, and we shall see. I think it has a very distinctive look. It might not be for everybody. 30 seconds left on the clock. We are at 58%. It's going back and forth, baby, back and forth. I'm a little upset with how the synth has been doing so far. I was expecting... Triple L says it's ugly. It's an ugly synth. Swords and Synthesizer says classic. Dubstation says ugly. We need an ugly emoji in the chat. That would be good. I think we need some... Can I get some scum pukes or scum vomits, whatever I put it as? So that's that. No. 62% of you said no, it does not pass. And I have to disagree, contributing my half a point. I think this is a beautiful synthesizer. I think the red, green, and blue look is iconic. I think it meets the definition of, it just has that vintage look. Sure, it doesn't have wood paneling. It's not a Juno 106, but to me, this just feels like a vintage synth. It's got a look to it. It's not a black box. It's got a very striking visual look. And I actually wouldn't mind if more synths had this sort of look to it. The red, green, and blue, for me personally, is good, but I understand if some people, don't love it. Pliskin says all-time recognizable, even if ugly. Adapt says it's no Elvira. I understand not loving it, but I get a half a point to contribute to, and I do disagree on this one. I like the look of this synth. So, next question in the chat. We're going on to the Dale Cooper test. Let's see, I got to remove some stuff here. So, the Dale Cooper test. Is the synthesizer versatile enough to handle bass leads, pads, and textures without becoming too unfocused or too limited? Unfortunately, we can't go back and change our mind. We are stuck. Tripwell says the buttons are horrible on a worn-out one. Luckily, this one's very good. Distilled says, I'm a sucker for both designs like the Juno's Jupiter 6.8 and the Prophet wood grain style. Yeah, Oral Escape, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Welcome. So, is this synthesizer versatile? So that's the question. 35 seconds left on the clock. Can it handle most of your categories without being able to do so much that it loses its jus, its je ne sais quoi, its gorgeousness, So that's going to be for you guys to say. Nowhere near the Jupiters, though, Law of Awe says. 96% of you say yes. I'm very surprised by that result. Although I guess I could see why. I could see it. So, 96% said yes, and I agree too. It is a very versatile synth. It basically can cover all of your ground that you might possibly need. So we are at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of 11 questions, and we're only at 3.5. I'm hurting here. The Nostromo test. Here we go. Can you access? Let me get the... Hey, Jason, welcome to the stream. How's it going, my friend? The Nostromo test. Can you access all parameters directly from the front panel without needing an external programmer? This one is... this is interesting. I feel like I've sort of lost control of the Nostromo and the training day test. I think in a way I should have voted to pass the training day test, because you can't easily tweak things, but do you need a programmer for this? Yes, you do, right? So that is what it is. I think I know what you guys are going to say on this one. I'm very sad about the way this Legendary Synthesizer Test is going. 14 seconds left, guys. For me, I was expecting this one to do very well because it is a wonderful synth, but it's not hitting this rubric great. I think it's kind of like the Quai K1 in the sense that's it. No, 77% say no, and I, of course, do too. Unfortunately, this synthesizer... it just is the case that it's not. The Deep Space 9 test. Does this synthesizer have deep modulation possibilities that keep sound designers excited? And, this is tough. 55 seconds on the clock. This one's really, really tough because We've got an LFO. We've got an envelope. The LFO. Can I assign this? Does sample and hold on the LFO? We've got 24 seconds left. Is that enough? Yeah, synth an amazing synth doesn't score well on paper. Still incredible. This is really fucking tough for me. Because I want to see this synth do well. But we do have cross mod and sync. We do have cross mod and sync. So you guys voted yes. 55% voted yes. I need a second. Cross mod and sync. You guys help me out here. Does cross mod and sync save it? That's the question. Sample and hold on the LFO. Because for me, a synthesizer that has like 2 envelopes and an LFO, it's not enough. Okay, one way we could parse this. You guys tell me if I'm like off the reservation here. But one way we could parse this is, does this synthesizer, as compared to other synths, so the Juno 106 can't do cross mod. Prophet 5 can do cross mod. Prophet 600 can do cross mod. Oberheims. Could the OBXA do cross mod? I think the OBX could. There's no PWM, that's right. Novel response says it's a soundtrack machine. Triple says, does anybody know about the oscillators? It's a DCO oscillator. You can do PWM with cross mod, like a little, there's a trick to it. Binaural Odyssey says, does a pencil keep an artist excited? Well, it certainly could be the case that, you know, many people could spend many, many hours making great sounds on this. I would argue this is almost the perfect sort of place as far as in terms of simplicity. With a programmer, it is so simple, so great to use. It's so immediate, but has enough to get some really great sounds. But the test, the Deep Space Nine test, is does the synthesizer have deep modulation possibilities that keep sound designers excited? Elliot says AX80 can do cross mod. DCAO, yes. Rob's blasting the emojis. Thank you very much. Do great strings and try the organ sounds. Swadok says maybe it falls a little short, and I have to agree. It's fucking close. You can route the envelope to pitch. You can do more with it than the Poly 6. You can do more with it than a Poly 6. Dual envelope would help. You can mod it for that. Cross mod, fuck, I'm just like looking behind me, like what synths? I don't know. Okay, so what examples of synths? Let's talk about DCO analog synths. What synthesizers from this era would pass this test? That might be a question. Dubstation says it's not a really good synth test, it's an iconic synth test. That's true. Adapt says it's a pretty basic synth, nothing wrong with that. Crossmod on monopoly, yeah, I could do that. Do I think is there a DCO synth? I mean, the Matrix 6 obviously would pass. Prophet 600 would pass. Prophet 600 would pass with the poly mod, right? It's enough. Expander would pass, Shane, easily. Not DCO though. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be wasting time. It's just actually, this synth is very, very on the line for me. Yeah, Polymod and PWM on the P600. See, Good Dog, I don't know if the 106 would pass. Like, what does the 106 have? This is a deeper synth than the 106, I would say. Oh, this is so fucking tough. All right. I promised to protect the sanctity of this test and not pass things just because I like them. So I'm going to, unfortunately, have to fail it. So we're up to 1, 2, 3. What are we up to? 1 point. We're up to 4. Ugh. God damn it. I'm really upset about the total score here. We're in trouble. So, moving on to the Han Solo test. I can't believe I failed it on the Deep Space. Oh, I'm going to hate myself. Han Solo test. Has this synthesizer aged like a fine wine? If it's new, does it have the potential to become a future classic? 1 minute on the clock. Has the synthesizer aged like a fine wine? I would say yes. I think this is the definition of a synth that came out and was not anybody's cat's pajamas at the time. And nowadays, this is one of the best vintage analog synths you could get if you want to get a synth that feels vintage. You know, it's so warm. It's warmer than the other JXs. It's warm like a Juno 6 or 60. Probably warmer than a Jupiter 8, you know, and that's what we want from vintage analog synths most of the time. If you're a producer, 14 seconds left, and you want to make some music and you've got a bunch of VSTs, but you want to add one warm analog synth, this is a great one. You've got 2 voices. You know, I wish it had Betty MIDI. That way we could use like a controller panel with it or something. 75% of you guys said yes, it is aged like a fine wine. And I too agree it is the definition of a fine wine synth. So that brings it up to 5. And we are on to the final test. Now this one is a fun one. This is the Vangelis test, and it counts for 2 points because it is the most important of questions I could ask you. The Vangelis test: do the raw oscillators and filters of the synthesizer have that magical quality? Does it need effects to sound good? 1 minute on the clock. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Tripwell points out, yep, prices are going up right now too. It probably will. Thank you very much, Rob, for the last Tech House track comment. I'm going to put a link at the end of the description, end of the video to that on the end screen. Last week's live stream, if you haven't checked it out, was a really good stream to close out 2024. It was taking the JX-3P. 30 seconds left on the clock. Does it have that magical quality and making really what ended up being like kind of more of a progressive house type track. But it was a really fun stream, and it just highlighted how gorgeous the JX-3P sound. John Lance, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Lava says, probably the best filter of all the JXs. Yeah, I'm very excited to shoot the filters out in the future. And we have come to the end, and 83% of you guys said yes. I'm curious to know what the 20% or so of you guys thought, who said no, you don't think it has that magical quality. And what synths would you say do? Would it be the Junos, perhaps? So we have a final score of 7. And that means it is a classic synthesizer. So right there at the bottom of the classic synth ranking, it just eked by. So now we can jump into the synth ranking over here and check it out. So the JX-3P is a classic synth. Let me make sure I get that all lined up properly. Oh, I'm putting that in the wrong spot. We're going to go classic and see where that lines up with everything. Let's move that on over. And there we go. Now, we got 7 points. So, $750 divided by 7 points means you're spending $107 per point. So let's put that in here. 107. Here we are. And we can bring that back in. There we are. So JX-3P is a classic synth. So first thing we should do is actually just move this into the classic synth category. And it is going to go below the Waldorf Blofeld, one of the best possible prices. So we've got a few classic synths we've checked out now. So this is super fascinating. So looking at what we're looking at here, Korg Monopoly, of course, at the top, the only legendary synth so far to check out. The Ensoniq Mirage scored really well as an iconic synth and a very good price per point. 62, one of the cheapest. Waldorf Blofeld, just incredible value. What you get for that synth, 56 bucks per point in the classic category. JX-3P summarily spanking the Moog Source in terms of, for a classic synth, meaning, you know, vaguely speaking, the Source and the JX-3P are kind of on a, and that feels right. They both sound really good, but the interface is lacking. That for what they are, you pay half as much for the quality of a JX-3P as you do for a Moog Source. But it still gets beat by synths like the Poly 800 and K1 in terms of raw value in the Ensoniq Mirage. So it's very interesting. I would love to check out a Microwave XT. You would find it legendary. I've been curious about buying one of the keyboard versions. I think 2D Cat has talked about that you can modify the polyphony. I have to be there. Yeah. Oral Escape says the U20 is dubious. Is that a bit optimistic? I used one of those ones. Yeah, unfortunately, that Rompler just did not do well on this test. It doesn't mean it's a bad synth. David Wise, composer of the Donkey Kong Country soundtracks, definitely one of my biggest inspirations, used the U220, the rack mount version, for so many of the sounds in DKC2, all of the strings, the orchestral stuff. He used the one of the orchestral cards, I believe. We'll get there with the FB01, TH81Z. I haven't yet, actually, Aquatic. I should definitely check that out. So as we've added more synths to the Legendary Synthesizer Test here, we're starting to really get a sort of way to understand what's going on with the world of these synths. And as we add more and more, JV8080, those were numbers, JV880, I think, to me, that's like the definition of a synth that would fail the Dale Cooper test. Like a Rompler that does so much that it just doesn't do anything perfectly. I appreciate it, Tripwell. That's very kind of you to say that. Swords and Synthesizers asks, how will samplers and Romplers compare? It just kind of depends. Of course, they may or may not have the advantage or disadvantage there. You know, we haven't run, say, the Proteus through yet. I've got an MPS and the 2600. But I would say, for instance, it might pass the Dale Cooper test because even though it does a lot, it has a sound, it has a vibe. It doesn't lose the magic because it just does so much. But yeah, Tripwell, no, I'm not. Jay Bognap, welcome to the stream. I like the Prophet 600 and the Matrix 6. Those are both really great synths. Speaking to Brad from Isla Instruments, he said those are his two favorites, actually, those same two. John Lance says, I had the JV90. It would fail. So yeah, it's an interesting, I always find it cool to sort of go through and see where these synths land, you know, because the street prices are all over the place when you look at the cost of these synths. You know, like just looking at the classic category here for a second, 432, 750, 2200, like it's really wide range. Less than that, you're looking at all three of those synths cost $400 more or less. The Ensoniq Mirage, incredible value at $566 right now for what you get, and almost makes me sad I sold it. There's some part of me might one day go back to it, but there would just have to be a really great programmer. For me, it's just that lack of editing and the sample loop points being so rough. It's not like another synth or a sampler where you can really set those loop points well. You'll almost always hear the loop, which for me kills it. We haven't gotten to the DW8000 yet. That, of course, I mean, DW8000 is one of my favorite synths. That's like a synth I'm never parting with. I would say for me, that's going to be hard for that synth to not pass pretty well. It really covers a lot, but then again, you know, we got kind of banged up on this one. Training day tests, I feel like this one might have passed the training day test. However, it would have only gotten 7.5 if I had passed it. So, Synthsonic says, maybe the Vangelis test should count as 3 points instead of 2. This was skin of the teeth classic. I do think this synth classic feels right. I personally, because I love it so much, would have been happy to see it be iconic. I do think I need to, just for myself, really clarify the training day and Nostromo test, because it should fail the Nostromo test. It's the definition of a synth that's easier to use with a programmer or editor. But I don't know. But then on the other hand, what would be a synth that would... I mean, yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm trying to think of a synth that would pass one but not the other. So I'll have to think about that. I guess something like the Alpha Juno has meaningful controls that affect the like brightness well more than this, but don't require you to go in there. Yeah, the SQ80 series would maybe be in there. I love the filter on the SQ80. Oh wow, JV1080 just got 4 of them in an estate sale. That's pretty awesome. Now, that's the that's the OG Rompler, right? I've thought about getting a XP30 or XP80 at some point. And the thing is, Rob, if you add the price of the programmer, say you add $250, right? Let's just do that. So if I said that passed it, made it 8 points, right? But we made it $1,000, let's say, then it actually would race the price per point, which is fascinating, right? That would actually make it $125 the price per point. And ultimately, I think price per point is the best way to look at these. Triple asks, where was it made? It was made in Japan, I believe. Yeah. SQ80 is awesome. We will be featuring it on the stream soon. I would love to get a tutorial done for that. Matrix 6 tutorial should be coming soon. And by soon, I don't mean immediately soon. I just mean soonish. I promise I will do that. And then I think I want to do either the JD800 or the SQ80 next. It would be great to have some custom patches I made for the Legendary Synth sample pack for that. So, yeah. Okay, I think this is a good place to call it for the evening. These streams are my favorite stream. I know they're probably the nerdier, deeper, you know, sorts of maybe not quite as much fun, but I love the interaction with you guys and that you guys get to decide if the synthesizer passes or not. Oh, I didn't know that, Tripwell. That's interesting. Is devaluation a positive or a negative? Well, jumping back real quick, actually, we can go look. I would say it can kind of be both. For instance, what's the least devalued synth on the list is the Waldorf Blofeld. Well, I guess that's because it's still sold nowadays. But then the next would be the Monopoly, right? So it's come down by about 50%. It was, we could infer by that it was worth about $3,600 when it launched. And in a way, Rob, that means that it could that it sort of is holding its value longer, right? Like it will continue to hold that value in a way that maybe something like the JX-3P won't. I would argue, though, that's one way to look at it. Like in terms of investing your money, will the monopoly still be worth something? And I think, yes, it will. On the other hand, I would say for most musicians who want to actually use the instruments, the optimal thing, you want a high devaluation. So the Mirage is the highest devaluation. The K1, like all of the synths that are 85% and up really feel like good buys. Mirage, Blofeld, or that one hasn't devalued all that much, but that's because it's still relatively new. You'd still buy it new. So Mirage, JX-3P, Poly 800, Quai K1, and if the U20 wasn't Dubious, it would also be really great in the sense that you can get a synth that hypothetically, if it was priced correctly at the time that it launched, then you're getting a lot more bang for your buck from the more devalued synths. Does that make sense? So that's how I like to think of it. I really love these streams, and I think the more we do, the cooler it gets, and the more filled out the sample pack gets. So we're up to... What are we up to? I'm going to just pull it up over here so I can tell you exactly what it is, because I don't want to mislead anybody. So here are the stats on the Legendary Synth sample pack. What's inside currently? 64 patches from iconic... well, actually, I shouldn't say iconic. There's even legendary patches in there. Synthesizers like the Korg Monopoly, Roland JX-3P, Moog Source, Korg M1, Poly 800, Poly-N Synth. So I actually sampled some of the granular and physical modeling patches from Poly-N Synth, put it in the pack. Spectrasonics Atmosphere. That's 1,324 stereo wave samples. So the amount of work that went into this is pretty big, and that's why I'm doing it weekly or as we do these live streams, because although I could not do this all at once. And that's 64 sound fonts as well to load into your favorite sampler. I love Towel. But sound fonts are pretty universal. They're not completely universal. I don't know if like Deluge can load them or something. But yeah. Dubstation says, I mean, with inflation since the 80s, all synths were major money losses if purchased new. Right. I think like a synth like the CS80 would be one of the exceptions to that, where it was very expensive when it was launched, but it's actually maybe even more expensive using my current metric of street prices, flawed as it may be, right? But it might actually have a devaluation. MS-20 would be a good one to do. MS-20 did very good on all of our Versus streams. I'm going to do some more Versus stuff coming up too, but I kind of like alternating between the Legendary Synth streams and the genre streams where we try different stuff out. But anyways, the link to the Legendary Synth sample pack is in the description. It's got 84 patches. When I filled it up to 100 patches, that'll be the end of Volume 1, and the price is going to go from $10 to $30. So it's not a bad time to get it now while it's still relatively cheap. Of course, members of the channel get it 50% off. That's also really cool. We're going to keep putting synths in there. We'll probably get 2 or 3 more in, and then I'll cap it at the 100, right? And I will do a stream or a video showing you guys everything you get in it, because I do understand that I'm kind of asking you guys to buy it blind when you buy it now. And again, if you've already purchased it, check your email. I did send the 1.1 update, which has all of the JX-3P sounds in it, and they sound really good. We have a little bit of time, so I'm actually going to do something a little different, but just because we kind of, since we have the time, right? Why don't I pull... Oh, wait. I don't have... Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll take this MIDI cable. Let's take this MIDI in cable. and put it in the MIDI out. Put her in the... Yep, put her in the back door. Perfect. And then we'll just route this in, and we will turn the music down. And we're going to turn the JX off, but we'll turn Tau Sampler on. And I'm not hearing anything, but I am seeing it. So, oh, I think I know why. Let me unfreeze this real quick. There we go. So, let me go ahead and also open the display capture here. And we can just kind of move this down a little bit so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. So we'll open Tau Sampler up here. And we can hear some of the sounds that are in the Legendary sample pack. So what you're hearing right now is the sample pack and not the synth, even though they will sound similar. So this is like a bass sound, which is pretty cool. Little more attack if you want that. I put the filter on. Let's check out some of the other samples real quick. So if we go in here, we've got EBM God. This is like your perfect EBM bassline type of sound. So really cool. And of course, you know, you could get all sorts of fun with that, you know. Put it in polyphonically, you can even play this type of thing like as a pad. Really like almost virusy type sounds. For those sorts of vintage industrial tones. Let's check out a couple more of these. So that we got that. All sorts of patches, like from Polyend. I don't even want to get into that. Let's just focus on the JX-3P sounds. So we've got Icy Squares. So this is a really cool one. Turn the volume down a bit, but increase the release. Oh God, that's fucking shrapnel. Increase the voices so we don't get any stealing. Sounds better in this range down here. Really fun sort of bell tone. And I made this sound using the cross mod or the metal mode of the JX-3P. So it's a custom sound, not a preset. Love that type of thing. What else do we have here? Synth Brass 2. So I played this one earlier in the stream from the synth, but now you can hear it here. Just gorgeous. It's just a really gorgeous sound. And it is a sound that, you know, potentially could take something like the Poly 800 off out of the sample pack. I am going to remove some samples as I'm going to overshoot 100 by a bit and then pull out any samples I don't think are 100% there. Just the warmth is so good. Just a great synth wavy sort of sound. So, hey, have a good night, good dog. Thank you for hanging out with us. Yeah, oozing 80s on that sound. It's just a really good one. What else do we have here? Comparing that to, say, this patch, very similar type of patch, but I programmed on my Prologue using Omnisphere's hardware integration. So, using a little bit of FM in there. So that's another patch you have in here, not a JX-3P patch, but I just want to show it off real quick for those of you guys who haven't fucked around and found out yet. Mostly, I got really good JX-3P pads and poly sounds. So let's start with Filter Flow. We heard this one earlier. And it just has that warmth that you're gonna struggle getting from a VST. I'm not saying it's impossible, but we've reviewed a lot of VSTs on this stream, and I just don't quite think this is as good. They're as good as this. Like, if that was in a track, I wouldn't know it's a sample. It has the character. Really gorgeous. Continuing on here to Metal Fetishista. So I talked about this in the beginning, but this sort of like cross mod. And I made it particularly edgy with the deliberate intent of like, okay, it's a little much maybe, so you can just bring that down. Maybe you don't want it, add some key tracking and warm it up and take it into this almost like, it's almost like an organ pad sound. And again, this is not using any delay or reverb, right? We're just listening to... really cool sound that I was able to make on this. String 1, I talked about this one. So just, if you want to get that sort of soundtracky. If I could play the fucking notes. Kind of that, it's in that soundtracky neighborhood. I wouldn't say it's all the way there. So those are the pads, and then moving on to poly. So like IR 3109 here. This one. Sorry, let me make sure we've got that cranked up. I mean, what could possibly I would believe it's an Oberheim. Let me answer your question there. If I go and actually pull this up here. Sorry, let me look over here. I try to keep them as small as possible. If I just look up, what are we using? JX-3P, IR 3109. This is 32 megabytes, right? So I try to use the shortest possible time to sample them. To Karmic, I don't know what the chords were. I sort of just fuck around when I'm playing synths. And I apologize. I know I use a lot of the same chords and play in C minor a lot. Sync Sweep, I played this one earlier too, so... Really wonderful sound. What else do we have in here? And I think that might have been it. I think that might have been all 10. We have 10. I know I sampled 10 patches. And just some of... Oh, here's one. A keys patch, Organica. So this is sort of like an E-piano sound. And again, using the cross mod, the metal, I really liked how it sounded. So... Really kind of interesting metal sort of sound. Yeah, it's almost in that Kwai K3 sort of vibe. Super cool. So I think that's all of the patches from here. And of course, we've got, you know, the Moog Source Blue Monday sound. So we've got, what else do we have? We've got so much from so many of the synths. Tanta Pena from the Monopoly. Oh, need to import it. Just, you know, huge sounds that you can't just get from anywhere. You know, some of the granular stuff from Poly and Synth. So I know some people will be upset with me that I sampled a modern synth, but for me, I kind of like that the library has a lot of range. It's not just, they're very cool sounds, but not just, you know, vintage analog synths, especially the simple ones, can kind of produce mostly the same types of stuff. I believe M.Ambient, I agree. The cross-mod and inverted envelopes are a huge part of what sets the JX-3P apart. Yes, you absolutely could. And it comes with the individual wave files. So if for some reason you can't use the sound fonts, you can just load the wave files in individually. What else do we have in here? Just while I'm sort of, you know, kind of covering this. A brass patch from the Poly 800. Not everybody's favorite synth, but this sort of one I thought was really cool. A fun one, really vintage sort of sound. What else do we have in here that's fun to kind of like cover real quick? Got like this FM patch I made that's got I think I used actually ring modulation to create this sound. So not like typical FM. That's sort of, I call it beat up DX because it's like a DX7, but it's a little bit more fucked up. What else do we have? We got some really bright virtual analog stuff. You can hear kind of that granular element to that if you want to go all the way over there. From the M1, one of my favorite patches. So again, I just wanted to highlight, since we had a little bit of extra time at the end of this stream, some of the sounds you can get in here. I will do a full stream kind of covering it. Really fun wavetable sound here. Oh, perfect pitch. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it is a classic synth, but not quite all the way there. Let's see. Poly. Where is, let me search beautiful. Yeah, here we go. Poly. This one is one of my favorite patches. The compression, I used a compressor on the sound to make it. So beautiful is boring. It's fun because it's got a quick attack, so you've got that articulation. It needs a little bit more release or reverb. So you could certainly use it for like a sequence, and if you cut the release down, right, you could definitely get really snappy sort of sound to it. And then if you increase the release a lot, yes, they are multi-sampled, so you've got a sample every third key all the way up the key bed. So I think that's a good enough place to call it for the evening. I had fun tonight. I don't know about you guys, but to me, that was a pretty good stream. I haven't yet. I actually just got a USB floppy emulator for the DSS-1, so I know I could use the floppies, but for me, using the being able to use software to get some sounds in there just seems like a lot less of a headache. But we'll see. Kraftwerk, oh yes, they're coming. Is anybody else got tickets? Perfect Pitch thinks I have the problem, not the synthesizer. That's a fair enough point, probably. Guys, I just wanted to say I've got just the smallest amount of whiskey lines. I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for joining me in 2025. I hope this year is the best year for us as a community, but also you in particular as a synthesist. I hope you have some really great fun with synths. Whether you're putting music out there or not, it's up to you, but I would always encourage you to share what you do with the world. It certainly changed my life. So I just want to have one more cheers. Thank you guys so much for being phenomenal friends, for being part of my life, and I can't wait to see you guys next week. We're going to have a lot of fun this year. So happy New Year's, happy 2025. Orlando, I might have to get tickets. What is cheaper? Yeah, the USB is probably the way to go. Cheers, guys. Thank you so much for making this place the place to be. Continue to be excellent. And I will see you in the next video. I'll throw the JX-3P video from last week, making tech house. It's really more progressive house. But if you want to hear some more about the JX-3P, that's probably the best place to do it. So have a great night, guys.